Welcome! With us, you're not just a listener, you're part of the community, the movement driving real progress. Let's explore how big ideas can turn into real-world positive impacts together. My name is Ronny Eriksson, and this is the Impact Series.
Dr. Craig Wing. You've helped thousands of global leaders and executives in crafting their ideal futures through Imagineering and futures thinking, of which you have a PhD in, which also resulted in startup that helps organizations determine if they're going to succeed in the future. Your work spans over 50 countries, where you consulted for companies such as Google X and organizations such as the United Nations, and contributed to 2050 scenarios for the Nigerian government. You also founded 4 companies, secured patents for disruptive technologies, and actively invest in innovative startups. You've earned recognitions such as the AFLI Desmond Tutu Fellowship and WEF Global Shaper. And you're currently at the forefront of AI sentiment analysis, which solidifies your standing as a true leader in futurism and innovation. Welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you, Ronny. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the very warm introduction and allowing me to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, and the introduction, here is a lot of impressive stuff, a lot of complex things brought together, and I can't wait to delve into what all of this actually means and how it creates impact.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing that. I'm glad you got the right Craig Wing in. There's another Craig Wing from Australia, and he actually plays for the Japanese rugby team. So there's another one floating around. I'm glad you got me, not the other one.
Yeah.
Although he might say otherwise.
Yeah. We invited that guy, but then we tried to save it here in the end, so like you. Each of these episodes starts always with the big what-if question, because that's what Catapult Future Fest is all about. It's my favorite part because I get to throw you in the deep end right in the start and see if you have some other skills than the rugby skills. So let's go. What if we were all more capable at imagining the future?
That's a good question. What if we were all capable of imagining the future? I think for starters, we'd have a lot more tolerant world. I think let's start there, right? And I think that's important because all of us have biases that are built into the way we are. And these biases are formed when we're children. We create synapses in our brain, and these neural networks, these pathways become strengthened as we carry on. That creates the way in which you see the world. Part of the challenge is as we grow older, we rely on certain framing, certain ways of thinking. Our mental models, our software, if you will, become inbuilt. And often it's an ability to think beyond that. There's a great quote by futurist Alvin Toffler. He's the author of many books, one of which is Future Shock. And he says the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And embedded within that is the concept of imagination, right? So if we could imagine, I suspect we'd have a more tolerant society, being able to see the world more from other people's perspectives. And I think that's really important. One of the challenges we have right now, which is one of the mega themes of Catapult, is how do we explore a world that is kinder? How do you explore a world that is more inclusive? How do you find a world that has an ability to expand impact beyond the realms of capital and capitalist intent? So I think there's a first piece over there. I think the second thing we'd find is with people would have more imagination. I would like to think that we'd have more human societies, if that makes any sense. We're in a time right now in 2024 where we're driven by technology, artificial intelligence, big buzzword, big AI, open AI, generative AI, etc. But if you look at it, it's fascinating because the data shows us implicitly that artificial intelligence today is nothing more than essentially a statistical machine. It gives you the most likely truth, not the truth. The challenge is in businesses today and in society, by and large, we want people to be machines. That's what our education system is, by and large. Now, it's a little bit different here in the Nordics, but by and large, we weed out imagination because a lot of the education systems that we have are built upon the premise that we need employees on a assembly line, a production line. And so imagination deliberately moves us out of that. So I suspect we would have more humanists. And there's a lovely piece of research that was done in, I believe it was in April 2023, where they compared the actual output of doctors and a chatbot, right? So some kind of GPT. And they measured on two metrics. The first was quality of output, and the second was empathy of response. And when they did this as a blind test, vis-a-vis, it was no one knew who the advance came from. Was it a human being, a real doctor, or actual machine? What they found was 9.8 times, overwhelmingly, the survey respondents said that the machine was more empathetic than the doctor. And the challenge becomes, with a lot of naysayers, I say, well, that's the reason why technology will take all our jobs. And I say, no, that's not the case. That's why we need more empathetic doctors. And it's the same with imagination. We need people who embrace imagination. Right at the onset, you said Imagineer, that I stole from Walt Disney, because that's really what it is. It's about imagining the future, and that's part of my PhD. Imagine a future unthought. So it sounds like a paradox. How do you imagine something that you can't think about? But if you could imagine something completely different, that's the first part, imagine. An engineer is the nearing part. So imagine something fantastical, the unthought, as I say, in the realms of academia. Then go build it. So I think there's some stuff there.
Like there were so many good points in what you were saying. We've been talking a lot about this notion of creativity. Like why is like creativity also a so important skill? And I think the whole point of creativity that those people who are creative, say it could be artists or painters or those making new songs, is that they're able to imagine something that doesn't exist, and then they're able to put that on paper, show it, paint it, create a storyline. That imagination is actually a lot lost in like ordinary people. Why is that?
I come back to the way society is built in general. So again, if you look at the industrial age and even before that, if you think about how, let's look at another lens. If you look at how business has been created, right, the formation of the term the company, a business world today, started pretty much, I think it's in the 1800s when there were explorers and they're exploring the world, right? So the Dutch explorers, Spanish explorers, Portuguese explorers. And in order for them to go further, they needed capital. So in order to get capital, they had to get investors. What they created is they created a board. And that allowed the board to have some control and some kind of direction in terms of where this company is going. I'm going to give you a bit of a long story, but it's important to understand the evolution of business, right? So that was the first piece. That allowed the explorers to go further and see more things, right? So we now have the concept of boards and advisors, etc. Then we have the modern day organization where there was investment. Investment allowed more scale at a different level, but also to have a production line, as I alluded to before. The production line allows you to say, how do we eke out more efficiencies, make more stuff, better stuff, make sure we get all the deficiencies out of the system. At that stage, at that point in time, is we needed human beings, the person, to be able to do that stuff on an assembly line, creating cars, to take the door and put it in, to put the hinge in, to put the handle in. There wasn't a requirement for imagination. There was no requirement. In fact, if anything, having imagination slowed down the assembly line. So I've got a better idea, Ronnie. I want to change this door. We can do things differently. That's not your job. Your job is to take that door handle and put it in there. And now speaking to you, we've slowed down this process. That's scientific management, right? So how do we slow down, or rather, how do we maximize the time of efficiency of doing things? Then we move into the age of hyper leverage of the financial world that we have today. And we see things like the financial crash, all that kind of stuff, because leverage now says, if we give you more money, you can eke out even more productivity. So on the one hand, we've got the systems that are built that way around a society that says we're about building stuff and doing things. On the other side, which is an emergent pattern, is now the whole drive around technology. And it's around saying, how do we automate our societies? All the way from, the third industrial revolution, agriculture, and the mechanization of the farmlands by using the steam engine. How do we maximize that efficiency? And so how do we maximize that? Productivity, assembly lines, all that kind of stuff, even where we are today. And now there's this misnomer that we have to compete, and the only way we can do more to outcompete the machines is to become more machine, not less, and by implication less human. And so there's two forces. One is the way we've built a society is based off work, which is where a human being essentially makes a fast-turn bargain. They give up their time for labor in exchange for money to buy stuff, right? So on the one hand, it's the way societies are built and how money is done. And the second hand is this drive from this emergent technology thing. And the belief is we can just work harder than that. And you can't. So it's two forces, I think. And there's a whole bunch of others, but I would say those are the two biggest ones.
Yep. I find it like super interesting, like how that whole evolutionary like perspective actually plays a huge role in how we think and how we act. I was just reading this Sapiens book. I think there is a lot of like the same thinking that you're also coming with. We have a bit forgotten where we actually came from. We let a lot of these different systems of maybe laziness, you could even say, paint how we act and how we are and how we build ourselves onward. And we kind of live maybe in a society also nowadays where you don't need that imagination, but the world needs that imagination. And that limits a lot of our possibility for impact. It limits our ways of actually taking ourselves from here to the unknown future, to the like what's next, which has been kind of like a recurring theme also in all of these discussions. And that's why the whole what if question is also a really good question. If we build upon that, you probably have some what if question. You probably have like so what is your what if?
Well, before we get to the what if, I want to extrapolate and build on that a little bit, because that's part of my research, right? Around the whole question around we tend to believe, and this is why the what if one is an interesting one, but essentially how most people are built evolutionary is we tend to have a couple of biases in play. Historic biases, confirmation bias, success bias, all that kind of stuff, right? But fundamentally, all that stuff is based off the perception that what's going to be part of our future is an extrapolation of our past, right? And we see that the most in corporates. Let me give you another example. So I was just now at the Investor Day. And one of the conversations there was, can you imagine the global fund of 2050? What does that world look like? What does it invest in? What are the metrics? All this other kind of cool stuff. And one of the panelist gentlemen turned around and said, it's 26 years from now. And he goes, I've been in this for 26 years. So he goes, it was just a blink of an eye. It was like that, understand, right? And he said, we haven't changed so much in 26 years. And so now this is the challenge, right? So he said a lovely thing. He says, incrementalism takes decades. And that's a lovely phrase, right? Because what happens over there is we say, this is where we've come from in the past, and we believe that the future is just going to be an extension of that, right? And we do this all the time. So let's use the podcast as an example, all right? So I know you're newly launched, but let's assume we were running for 3 years or whatever, some amount of time, right? Just say, hey team, how have you been doing with new listeners, subscribers? We've been growing our numbers by 5% per month. So what's our extrapolation? Well, we'll look at 5% per month because it's obvious, right? Let's have a look at that. We know we have this many number of subscribers, paid. I hope you get some kind of paid endorsement or some version thereof in terms of money we've raised, but it's all about what happened in the past and we extrapolate that. Now, the problem with that is what happens if it's not? What happens if the past is not a determinant for the future? And it happens often. The biggest case is COVID. So if you're a business and you're doing your plans and you're doing your strategy and you go back to the end of 2019, so I think around about September 2019, hey, this thing coming out in China, it's not going to affect us, guys. We do a podcast, it's never going to affect us, whatever, right? We make cups, we sell cars, it's not going to affect us, planes, it doesn't. Suddenly there's this thing here that affects every facet of our being and everything that we know. Something that we didn't plan for, but it fundamentally affects us. So my PhD basically says, how do we think about the world from a 2x2 matrix? And it's modeled off Johari's window and Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. And if you think about a 2x2 matrix, the essence of this, which actually, by the way, is a book that I'm working on right now. I've just been signed up to be an author with Penguin Random House. It's called 4 Future Seasons. It's because each one of those 2x2 quadrants is named after a different season. And that context and that story comes from Japan, where I was traveling last year, where the aristocratic segment their garden into 4 different pieces, different parts. And in each quarter, in each quadrant, they plant plants and foliage and all those things specific for each season, so you can see how things move. But now I digress a little bit, right? But the point is there, in the quadrant of the known is where most of us operate in. That's where we see the data and say, this is where we're going to go. The what if question is powerful if executed correctly. Because if we just say what if, we'll just go, well, it's pretty easy. We'll just extrapolate these numbers. So the what if, how many listeners are we going to have in the podcast 3 years? It's pretty easy. Let's go get the numbers and we'll times it by 5% per annum, which is off per month. So that's the what if question when it becomes a linear fashion, but based off the things we know. The more important what if is the unknown unknowns. We just don't know, right? And so the question itself brings up the whole potential. If the listener, if the respondee understands that it's a tool not about extrapolation of the known knowns, but a prompting to say what is the unknown unknowns. So I think that's really, really important to clarify that piece over there. And so my research is really about saying, how do you create businesses? How do you create organizations that can succeed for a multiplicitous future, specifically this unknown world? And in my model, I call it the winter season. Why? Because Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones, there we go. And if you know the story, some of the listeners, some of you might not know it, it's based off this fictitious place, Westeros, where all these guys are trying to fight to be the next ruler of the land, and they're fighting amongst themselves, all these royal families, and they think that's the big thing. But what's the big problem? Is those White Walkers across the wall, right? And for the listeners that don't know, that's the zombies, the undead that are going to come kill them all, and that's the problem. In winter, in a winter future, the unknown, there's stuff out there that we just don't know, and so the problem and the question is, the challenge is, when you start thinking about the what ifs correctly, it's not about knowing. It's actually about not knowing. That's actually what we should be. So the question in itself isn't necessarily what if. The question should be, what don't you know? And then what if?
Exactly. So what don't you know?
Well, this is the challenge, right? Because as soon as you articulate that, then we start thinking about it. So let's give a few things over here, right? What if, to the point you said before, what if it wasn't about just imagination but kindness? What if we were kinder? I'd like to find out that question, right? I'd like to find out the question, what if somehow we could find, and it's part of the whole conference theme right now, what if we could find a system beyond capitalism? What if we could find something different? What if we could measure the success of countries, companies, individuals beyond financial metrics? That'd be really interesting, right? What if we could all be aligned? What if we actually had a vision? I'm a bit of a sci-fi geek, look at all these Star Wars and all this other kind of stuff. You're able to do this interplanetary stuff because as a collective, we all aligned for something. What if we were aligned? Right? And that last one is very interesting to me. What if we're aligned around certain things like world peace? What if we're aligned around energy? What if we're truly aligned beyond the paper talk of SDGs? Because it is, I hate to say it, it's all paper talk, right? But what if we truly were aligned around the development of SDGs, poverty alleviation, around food, around education? What if we actually met those SDGs? That'd be really interesting.
That's a really interesting take. There can probably my top 5 what ifs from like the larger context of thinking. But I think it goes again back a bit to the problem that people don't dare to think that big, because it becomes like, can it actually be achieved? Then probably they feel like not, and then you get discouraged, and then you choose a what if that you actually are already progressing or you already are moving towards. So how do we change the thinking? Because if those are the things we all are working towards, then real impact and real change is actually happening. Yeah. But people don't do it.
There's another reason why, right? Because we in society today, we don't reward questions. We reward answers. That's what we do. We reward smart people who give us answers to difficult questions, but we want the answer. We don't want the questions, because the questions leave us uncomfortable. It's like coming to the end of a book where there's no closing chapter, no conclusion. Like, well, this is a stupid book. I read 500 pages. I come to the end and there's no conclusion. Tell me what the conclusion is. And the problem is like the great thinker, the physicist Richard Feynman says, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And that's really important, because, exact to your point now, Ronny, a lot of the challenge that we have right now is we've got answers, bad answers to big questions. And they're bad answers, or they're answers we all know. I'm struck whenever I go to conferences and I listen to thought leaders in South Africa. Today is our election in South Africa right now. So today's our election. We're going 62 million people, a populace of that, we're voting, right? And look at the manifestos of all these different parties. And you can do the same thing whether you look at the Indian election, whether you look at what's going to come in the US, anyway. I guarantee you, if you look at the manifestos and the positions of all these different parties, this is not rocket science, folks. It's easy. We can see these answers. The problem is we're not asking the right questions. Are we using first thinking principles to go, what is the real problem we're trying to solve over here? What is it really that we need to solve, right? And that's the challenge. I think the challenge is we don't ask big enough questions, to your point. So it's not just the big enough questions, it's scary questions where we may not have an answer. And that's a problem, because we don't recognize that that actually that in itself is a good thing.
And now we start to slowly but surely see also why you've been consulting Google X. That's like one of my favorite organizations or like spin-off organization or side daughter organizations. There, this thinking has been actually executed pretty well. Pretty few people and organizations in the world are able to bury that much of their ideas and questions because they were not like doable right now. But then you look at the results that they have done, those certain solutions that you're like, who comes up with something like that? It's people like you, I assume. No, but it's like that's a true story. And now the big question is, how do we take that thinking and how do we really get it to people here at the festival or in the world, or the young people especially is probably the ones we need to infiltrate this like thinking to. How do we make it practical and actually put it in there?
Yeah, so a few thoughts, and I've alluded to some of them before, is again, move out the mindset of having answers, ask questions. Curiosity, huge thing. Always be curious. Again, one of the things is, as we grow up, for young listeners, we tend to get rid of this curiosity thing. Like, can I be curious about the world? No, be curious. Be curious, and part of that means you need diverse thinking. Diverse thinking doesn't come from you just reading books. It comes from reading books. It's from meeting people, asking hard questions. It's about reading history. It's about reading stuff that you don't know about, right? So one is that just ask questions.
But even more practical terms, because kind of like these are guidelines, what you should be doing. But how do we get actually people to do it? Because that's the biggest problem, in my opinion, is that we can tell that you need to be curious, but how do we actually get people to be curious?
I think a lot of it comes down to the incentive system, right? So what are we incentivizing for? So again, today, we incentivize for labor. We incentivize, as I said before, the Faustian bargain of giving up your time for labor. So we incentivize it. Is there an incentive system for thinking? For that, you look back in history, the Greeks had a great thing, Socratic method, right? Where we get together and we sit and we ask questions and we sit together with a bunch of people. We just say, what is this? And we talk about this and we debate that. Today, the concept of salons is the same kind of thing. So let's sit together. Let's ask some hard questions. If you look at some of the great thinkers, they often did this where they had peers who were super duper smart and they sat with each other and they debated things and they asked questions. I don't know if we do that anymore. I don't think we're deliberate in terms of making spaces and saying, guys, we're going to be grappling with this question. No, it's come listen to Craig who will tell you this thing. Craig doesn't know much. Trust me, I don't know much. Right? But that's the point. The point is, how do we get to a place where we can ask better questions as a group, as a collective? So one is, I think, is the deliberate incentive system to say, how do we reward and find a mechanism to say we have to do a space, a medium, a way to ask questions. I think is that first piece, right? The second thing is freeing up time. And this is important because the formula for today mostly is, it's work, it's rat race, it's some version thereof, but there's often not time to just think and reflect. As you said in the introduction, I work with executives around the world, and you go to these guys and you say, do me a favor, just open up your diary. How much time have you got in a week to think? Like one hour a week is all I'm asking. Open your diary, 1 hour a week where it says thinking time. None of them do it. Right? So how do you deliberately craft time? And this runs true for a young person as well, whether you're studying, whether it's your first job, whether you're a graduate, whether you've got a startup, right? Find time to think. Make it a deliberate practice. So I think there's two things over there. And then obviously what's aligned with that is, as I said before, how do you do this? Push yourself to be uncomfortable.
I love that. And I love the simplicity of like that, we are curious animals. We want to find out and learn about things. We feel really good about being like having our imagination in play, being curious, being creative. Kids do that automatically. Then parents and adults, they tend to forget about it. And I've also been asking the same question as you're stating that should be done. How many days have you spent in the past year just by yourself? And people start to think. And I spent last Saturday. Okay, what did you do? Watched Netflix, talked on the phone. So have you actually done that? No. So I think it's so simple. You just need to start spending more time by yourself doing like the super basic, small, simple things. So I think there we have actually a big part of the solution. So now that we're here at Catapult Future Fest, there is people like you. There are the impact startups. What kind of collisions, what kind of like meetings, what kind of next steps are you hoping to actually do here so that kind of like your purpose and vision also is fulfilled?
Yeah, there's a great book. There's a great book called The Drunkard's Walk. I don't know if you've read it. So you might see. Yeah. So and let's take the piece again. All right. There's a great book called The Drunkard's Walk, and in this book, it talks about a few things, right? But for me, there's two big takeaways. The first is the randomness of life that's based off Brownian theory, which is basically the movement of particles. It's all random and you can't really model that out, right? And in that, the author then goes and says, that's kind of how life is, right? So we over-plan for stupid little things by and large. So for example, hey, Ronny, we're going to go on holiday. Let's go on holiday 3 months from now. So we plan stuff. These are the dates, this is the accommodation, there's the flights, this is the food, the restaurants are going to go, these are the sites. You over-plan for those things, right? So you plan and plan and plan. But the big things that really affect us in life are the things you don't plan for. You don't plan for meeting your significant other on that night out, going out with your friends. You don't plan for that job per se. It's a chance recommendation from someone else. So from that respect, what it then means is it's not so much about, yes, it's about being intentional, about saying, I want to go do this, but it's about being open to opportunities. It's about being open to say, how do we do more stuff? Some of the questions that I get asked when I mentor young people is they say to me, which is aligned with this, and you'll see where I'm going with this, is they say, Craig, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know if I should study this, if I should study this. Look how technology is changing things. I get the same question from parents. Craig, you tell us about the future. It's so scary or exciting. What should my kids study? And I say to them, look, there's two things. First of all, if you don't know what you're going to do next, that's okay. One of the things that no one tells you as an adult, we're all making this stuff up. It's all a lie. No one has their plans. It's all a lie. People make crap up as we go along, right? So that's number one. But if you don't know what you want to do, make a choice that gives you more choices, not less choices. Go broad, not narrow, right? And that's really, really important because the more optionality you have, the better it is. So my ambition for this conference, for the Catapult Future Fest, isn't necessarily to say, look, I want to have these many meetings, etc. That's a structure, a means and a way to say, how do I create what's called incidental occurrences? Things that happen by the wayside. It starts, though, by just saying, just be there. Just be there, be present, meet someone. Also, you don't want to be that guy, and I've been there on the other side, where there's 10 people, 20 people who just want your contact details. That's not a human experience. You want to meet someone, have a coffee, maybe see them the next day, chat about things. Hey, give me your contact details. Let's do something there, right? It's about opening yourself up to these chance occurrences. Because again, coming back to what we said in the very beginning, it's imagination. That's basically what we're talking about, is the human experience. How do you be more human at conferences? Which is why you can't replace it with Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff, because it is the human element. There's a connection there. So for this specific conference, just like all the others, I just go there with intention of saying, let me meet folks, and if they are the ones that I'm supposed to meet and it resonates, go with it.
Like, there is a lot of beauty in what you're saying. The human experience is one of those elements we tend to like overlook the most, forget that it's most important to be here and now, to be present, and to actually like let everything around you flow. Because I think all my best trips are trips when someone just books me tickets and I just go and then see what happens. And all of the best things normally comes from those, because it's not like nailed down and you're not as stressed when you go into it. Again, it goes to really basic, small things. And that's what I think is like with the whole imagination and future and all of that thinking, is that you don't need to make it that complex. Actually, like all of those answers are found in the simplicity.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the conversation, that you together introduction, which is a great bio from a like achievements point of view. What it didn't include is things like, I traveled to 53 countries. I've done some stuff. About a month ago, I was in the Himalayan mountains tracking snow leopard. I try to find tigers in India. I've gone to see a silverback gorilla in Uganda. A lot of these things, exactly to your point, it's not planned, but it's about saying, how do these things emerge? But put yourself in the current, in the wake of the opportunities to do stuff. The more opportunities you have, the more opportunities you have to be human and build these connections with other people. So it's exactly that. It's the human element. And I think, again, one of the mega themes coming out of Catapult, and I'll be talking about this on Friday, is really this concept of how to be more human.
As much as I would wish to kind of like delve deeper and deeper into these subjects, we unfortunately don't have enough time. But what I think I will do at this festival is do one plan, and is to find you somewhere and then like ask you a bunch of more questions and actually discuss with you like person to person. If you say shortly here to the end, one thing that people really should focus on when it comes to impact, what is that one thing?
When I was younger, a lot of the stuff that I was trying to do is I was trying to do mega change, affect 1 million people, 1 billion people, whatever the case may be. As I've gotten a little bit older, a little bit wiser, I hope, I think impact's measured at a micro level. Don't do it. Don't try to change the world. Of course, we will say change the world, obviously, right? I mean, practicality, we're not going to do it. Impact happens on a one-on-one. Impact happens at a hyper-local level. Impact is saying hello to someone that's having a really bad day. Impact is about opening the door for someone whose hands are full. It's about opening an umbrella. It's the little things. Don't overcomplicate things and say we have to raise $1 million fund to go feed the children in Africa. Great ambition, do it. I'm not saying you mustn't do it. But by and large, the way we measure impact is wrong, because you try to set yourself up for this huge thing. Just do the micro things, the little things every day. That's how you make impact. It's the impact that you can bring to an individual, another human being, that counts in the long run, because that's the stuff that they remember.
I love that. I just read a quote that said, what if success was measured in how good you make that one person feel that is close to you? And I think it summarizes pretty well also what you're saying. That's where the real impact and real success is. Thank you so much for a really thorough and insightful discussion. Can't wait to talk with you more.
Thank you, Ronny. Thanks for the opportunity and allowing me to share some thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.